All right, let's turn now to Mike McCoy. He's an insurance company CEO from West Des Moines and a trustee here at Grandview. He's a Republican who says that he's deciding between you and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Mike?
Thank you. So what makes you think that Putin would be responsive to your Ukraine solution?
And before you jump in, Mr. Ramaswamy, I just want to ask you to remind the audience here what the solution is that he is referring to.
That's fair enough. So I've proposed, and thank you for coming prepared, I appreciate that. I've proposed a reasonable end to the Ukraine war. I don't think this war is advancing our interests. I think we're spending $200 billion of our taxpayer money that would be better used to defend our own border. But even worse, I believe it's increasing the risk of World War III because it's driving Russia further into China's hands. So what I've proposed is a reasonable deal that would allow Ukraine to come out with its sovereignty intact, yes, with some territorial concessions of the Russian-speaking regions in eastern Ukraine, and a hard commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO, but only if Putin exits his military alliance with China. That Russia-China alliance is the top threat that we face today. So do I trust Vladimir Putin? Of course not. Is Putin a great craven dictator? Absolutely he is. But we will trust him to follow his self-interest, just as he will trust us to follow ours. And because you asked a good question, I'm going to go into this detail. Nixon did this in 1972. When he pulled Mao Zedong out of the USSR, that was a China-Russia alliance back then. Did we trust Mao? Of course we didn't. But there were kinks in that armor back then. There are kinks in that armor today in the Russia-China relationship. Look, when Putin and Xi Jinping met, Putin sends then weapons to India and Vietnam. That's sending a signal to China. China doesn't appreciate that. China wants to complete a railroad in northeast China to the ocean. Russia's not letting them. So if we look closely, there are kinks in that armor. But it's going to take a visionary leader who's going to say, we're going to use the Ukraine war as an opportunity to say to Russia, you know what, we'll reopen some economic relations with Russia, as Nixon did with Mao. But we're going to require no more joint military exercises, no more military sales between Russia and China. Weaken that alliance. That's the single most important thing the next president can do to reduce the risk of World War III. And I want you to understand, I'm the only presidential candidate really talking about that Russia-China alliance. Yet that is the single greatest threat we face to the United States of America today. And I do think it's going to take a leader coming from the outside of the existing foreign policy establishment. I'll remind you, the one that got us into the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where thousands of our sons and daughters went to go die, adding $7 trillion to our national debt 20 years later, with the Taliban still in charge in Afghanistan and Iraq still a broken country. If that isn't a sign that we need fresh blood in our foreign policy establishment, I don't know what is. And so I think it's going to take new leadership, and that's the deal that I would do.
Staying on this Ukraine topic, I want to follow up. You want to suspend support for Ukraine in this war and get the United States out of that conflict.
As part of this deal that I've laid out.
If Putin doesn't take you up on that deal, would you allow Putin to use force to take all of Ukraine if he wanted to?
So we're going to do, I think the deal we're going to do now is actually going to allow Ukraine to come out with its sovereignty intact, which is not even the path that Ukraine is on.
But if Putin does not take you up on your deal, which he may not.
Look, I'm convinced on my ability to negotiate this
deal. If he
deal.
decided to use force to march into Kyiv, take all of Ukraine, would you, as President of the United States, allow that to happen?
So, Abby, that, I think, is a fictitious scenario for a lot of reasons. Part of the reason Putin's been able to seize eastern Ukraine is they have not had the same level of resistance as the rest of Ukraine.
How is it a fictitious scenario when
because he literally has tried to do it and has failed to do it.
So what I would say tried to do it, I think, is the point I'm trying to make here.
And he failed to do it because I think that this, it's a fair question.
He failed to do it because the United States backed Ukraine.
Well, but he failed to do it for a deeper reason. And now this gets into some details in the Ukraine war, but if you want to go there, I think we should go there. Which is that the eastern regions of Ukraine, these are Russian-speaking regions, where most of the people who live there don't even view themselves really as part of Ukraine. They have not been represented in the Ukrainian parliament for the better part of the last decade, almost the entire last decade. So there was no counterinsurgency or resistance. That's why Putin was successful in eastern Ukraine, but not the rest. So again, I come back to principles. Are there a lot of scenarios we can't map out in advance? But the basic principles are this. Russia's in a military alliance with China. I'm going to play hardball and require that Russia weaken or exit its military alliance with China. But we also have to stand by a few things commitments we've made, that NATO should not actually admit Ukraine to NATO. We made that commitment. Gorbachev made it. It was made to Gorbachev by James Baker in 1990. We haven't kept that commitment. We should keep that commitment too. And I think that that level of diplomacy avoids us using. I mean, let's look at the alternative now, Abby. We're talking about sending another $61 billion to Ukraine. It is unclear to me or anybody else what the next $100 billion is going to do that the first $100 billion didn't accomplish. And so I don't think throwing bad money after bad is going to be the solution here. I do think diplomacy is the solution, but it's going to take somebody who is committed to advancing U.S. interests to get this done. So my foreign policy is avoid World War III, declare independence from China, and then focus on securing our own homeland, which we're not talking about.
I want to get
enough,
back
Abby.
now to our
Yeah,
audience
absolutely.
member. We have a question